The Prime Minister told us then that we were seeing, in his words, a significant reduction in the virus. He told us then that there was no need for endless lockdowns and no need to change the rules about Christmas mixing. Since then, since that last PMQs, 17,000 people have died of COVID. 60,000 people have been admitted to hospital. And there's been over 1 million new cases. How did the Prime Minister get it so wrong? And why was he so slow to act?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, what he fails to point out is that on the 18th of December, 2 days later, the government was informed of the spread of the new variant and the fact that it spreads roughly 50 to 70% faster than the old variant, and that is why it is indeed correct to say that the situation today is very troubling indeed. We have 32,000 COVID patients in hospital. The NHS is under huge strain. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all the staff, the doctors, the nurses, everybody working now in our NHS who are doing an extraordinary job under the most challenging possible circumstances to help those who so desperately need it. And I thank them for what they are doing. But at the same time, I also want to thank all those involved in what is the biggest vaccination programme in the history of this country, where once again the NHS is in the lead, working with the Army and the Legion of volunteers and everybody else. And that programme of vaccines, Mr. Speaker, does show the way forward. It does show how we're going to come through this pandemic. And again, I repeat my gratitude to all those involved, because they've now vaccinated 2.4 million people, delivered 2.8 million doses, more than any other country in Europe. This is the toughest of times, Mr. Speaker, but we can see the way forward.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that effectively 2 days after that PMQs, the advice changed. The truth is, the indicators were all in the wrong direction back at the last PMQs. But be that as it may, the Prime Minister says he got that advice on the 18th of December, 2 days after PMQs. And we've all seen the Sage minutes of the 22nd of December confirming the advice that was given to the government. The government's advisers warned the Prime Minister that the new variant was spreading fast and it was highly unlikely that November-style lockdowns would be sufficient to control it. Pretty clear advice on the 18th of December to the Prime Minister from Sage. Tougher lockdown than November is going to be needed. I've got the minutes here, everybody's seen them. Yet instead of acting on the 18th of December, the Prime Minister sat on his hands for over 2 weeks. We're now seeing in the daily figures the tragic consequences of that delay. So how does the Prime Minister justify delaying for 17 days after he got that advice on the 18th of December?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must disagree very profoundly with what the right honourable gentleman just said, because he knows very well that within 24 hours of getting the advice on the 18th about the spread of the new variant, we acted to put the vast part of the country into much, much tougher measures. And indeed, what we are now seeing, and it's very, very important to stress that these are early days, we are now seeing the beginnings of some signs that is starting to have an effect in many parts of the country, but by no means everywhere. And it is early days, Mr. Speaker, and people must keep their discipline, keep enforcing the rules, and work together, as I've said, to roll out that vaccine programme. But, Mr. Speaker, I do recall that on the day that we went into a national lockdown, and sadly we were obliged to shut the schools, even on that day, the Labour Party was advocating keeping schools open for understandable reasons. Mr. Speaker, because we all want to keep schools open, but I think it a bit much to be attacked for taking tougher measures to put this country into the protective measures it needed when the Labour Party were themselves calling then to keep schools open.
Mr. Speaker, just for the record, I wrote to the Prime Minister on the 22nd of December. I hadn't seen the sage advice at that stage, saying to him, if it indicated there should be a national lockdown, he should do it immediately and he'd have our full support. I'll put that in the public domain so people can just check the record. But, Mr. Speaker, more fundamentally, the Prime Minister says we took measures straight away, we put people into different tiers. The advice was a November-style lockdown is not enough. How on earth was putting people into a different tiered system an answer to the advice that was given? And isn't this the situation that every time there's a big decision to take, the Prime Minister gets there late? The next big decision is obvious. The current restrictions are not strong enough to control the virus. Stronger restrictions are needed. And it's no point members opposite shaking their heads. In a week or two, the Prime Minister is likely to be asking members to vote for this. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when infection rates are much higher than last March, when hospital admissions are much higher than last March, when death rates are much higher than last March, why on earth are restrictions weaker than last March?
Mr. Speaker, we keep things under a constant review, and we will continue to do so. And certainly if there is any need to toughen up restrictions, which I don't rule out, Mr. Speaker, we will of course come to this House. But perhaps, as is so often the case, the right honourable gentleman didn't listen to my earlier answer, because I pointed out to the House that actually the lockdown measures that we have in place, combined with the Tier 4 measures that we were using, are starting to show signs of some effect, and we must take account of that too, Mr. Speaker, because nobody can doubt the serious damage that is done by lockdowns to people's mental health, to jobs, to livelihoods as well. And Mr. Speaker, if to listen to the right honourable gentleman over the last 12 months, you'd think he had absolutely no other policy except to plunge this country into 12 months of lockdown. And as for coming too late to things, Mr. Speaker, I think it was only a few weeks ago that he was attacking the vaccine task force that has secured the very doses, the millions of doses that have put this country into the comparatively favourable position that we now find ourselves. I don't think anybody in this House is happy with the disgraceful images that we've seen of the food parcels that have been offered. They are appalling. They're an insult to the families that have received them. And I'm grateful, by the way, to Marcus Rashford, who highlighted the issue and is doing quite an effective job by comparison with the right honourable gentleman in holding the government to account for these issues. And the company in question has rightly apologised and agreed to reimburse. But it is because we want to see our kids properly fed throughout this very difficult pandemic that we've massively increased the value of what we're providing. Another £170 million in the COVID winter grant scheme, £220 million more for the holiday activities and food programme, and we're now rolling out the national free school meal voucher scheme, as we did in March, to give parents the choice to give kids the food that they need. Under this government, we will do everything we can to ensure that no child goes hungry as a result of the privations caused by this pandemic.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that the parcels are disgraceful, but it shouldn't have taken social media to shame the Prime Minister into action. Like the Education Secretary, he blames others, and he invites me to hold him to account. So let me do that. Because blaming others, Prime Minister, it's not as simple as that, is it? Because I've checked the government guidance on free the Department of Education. I've got it here. It sets out example parcel for one child for 5 days. Department of Education, Prime Minister, you want to be held to account. 1 loaf of bread, 2 baked potatoes, block of cheese, baked beans, 3 individual yogurts. Sound familiar? That's the images, Prime Minister, you just called disgraceful. The only difference I can see in this list and what the Prime Minister's described as disgraceful is a tin of sweet corn, a packet of ham and a bottle of milk. So he blames others. But this is on his watch. The truth is, families come last under this government, whether it's exams, free school meals or childcare. Will the Prime Minister undertake, he wants to be held to account, to take down this guidance by the close of play today and ensure that all of our children can get a decent meal during the pandemic?
Speaker, the right honourable gentleman's words would be less hypocritical and absurd if it were not for the fact that the
I don't believe anybody's a hypocrite in this chamber. I think we need to be a little bit careful about what we're saying to each other. There was a not truth earlier, and there was also comparisons to others. Please, let's keep the discipline in this chamber and the respect for each other. We're tidying up how this Parliament behaves, and I certainly expect the leadership of both parties to ensure that takes place. Prime Minister, would you like to withdraw hypocrisy?
I'm delighted to be advised by you, Mr. Speaker. Let me confine my criticism to the absurdity of the, which I hope is acceptable, Mr. Speaker, of the right honourable gentleman attacking us over free school meals when it was a Conservative government that instituted free school meals, universal free, not a Labour government, and of the 280 billion that we have spent securing the jobs and the livelihoods of people across this country, uprating universal credit, increasing and in addition increasing the living wage by record amounts this year and last year, increasing local housing allowance. The overwhelming majority, the bulk of the measures, the benefits fall in favour of the poorest and the neediest in society, which is what this House would expect. And Mr. Speaker, he takes one position 1 week, one position the next. That is what he does. That's been his whole lamentable approach throughout this, if I can get away with lamentable, Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic. And he says he supports the vaccine now. He says he supports the vaccine rollout, and he goes and tries to associate himself with it because he senses that it is going well. But be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that was the party that wanted us, this country, to stay in the European Union vaccine programme. He stood on, yeah, absolutely true, he stood on a manifesto, which he has not repudiated, Mr. Speaker, to dismantle the very pharmaceutical companies that have created this miracle of science, which is true.
Prime Minister, there are questions, and sometimes we've got to try and answer the question to what was asked of you. I think to run through the history is one thing, but in fairness, it is Prime Minister's questions. What I would say is it was the final question. We've lots of others to go through. So I think what I'm going to do now is move on to Simon Jupp in Sidmouth, who's desperate to ask a question of you, Prime Minister. Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hospitality industry is the lifeblood of East Devon. Our pubs, restaurants, cafes and hotels provide thousands of jobs, places to meet and places to stay. The generous support package now put in place will tide many of these businesses over for now, but they will need further support. Will my right honourable friend consider extending the VAT cut for hospitality to give them a helping hand when they're back open for business?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has done everything he can to help businesses throughout this pandemic, and that's why he's extended the grants, and that's why we've got the cuts for both for VAT and for business rates, and we will do everything we can to help as we go forward. But the best thing would, of course, be to ensure that we roll out this vaccine programme and bounce back as fast as possible. Any further announcements my right honourable friend makes will be well ahead of the will be well ahead of the 31st of March, by which we intend to have a budget.
Let's head up to Scotland to the leader of the SNP with Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent in Lochaber, a producer and exporter of shellfish, is experiencing his worst nightmare. After loading a lorry of fresh local seafood on Monday, as he's done for 35 years, his driver faced bureaucracy and delays. Brexit red tape now means that £40,000 of his fresh, high-quality produce is lost, unable to be sold. Mr. Speaker, that 40,000 produce is income for over 100 local families in many remote and fragile communities. Can the Prime Minister tell my constituent, where is the sea of opportunity that he and his Scottish Tories promised?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting £100 million into supporting the fishing industry in Scotland and across the whole of the UK, and it is the policy of the Scottish Nationalist Party not just to break up the United Kingdom under their harebrained scheme, but also to take Scotland back into the EU and hand back control of Scottish fisheries to Brussels, thereby throwing away all those opportunities in a way that I think the right honourable gentleman himself opposite would say was totally absurd. And I'm amazed that he continues on this track.
Returning to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
I'm amazed that the Prime Minister continues to traduce the name of the Scottish National Party. He's been told before and he really should get it right. And frankly, that answer was an insult to all fishermen that are facing loss today. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that a third of the Scottish fishing fleet is tied up in harbour. Some boats are landing in Denmark rather than Scotland to avoid Brexit bureaucracy. Scottish seafood exporters are losing upwards of £1 million in sales a day. Seafood Scotland says all the extra red tape is an almost impossible task. It's even forced ferry operators to pause load deliveries to the continent. Mr. Speaker, the European Union have put in place a £5 billion fund to support businesses with the cost of Brexit. Last night, it was revealed that Ireland is receiving £1 billion of it. Can the Prime Minister tell Scottish business when they will be getting the same level of support, and where's the compensation for my constituent that's losing £40,000 today?
Mr. Speaker, he continually advocates the breakup of the union with the United Kingdom, and he continually advocates going back into the European Union, even though that would be immensely destructive to the Scottish, immensely destructive to the Scottish economy, to jobs, to livelihoods, to pensions, to the currency. And as far as I understand it, they're already spending money in Scotland on IndyRef 2, what they call IndyRef 2, when they should be getting on, Scottish nationalists should be getting on with fighting the pandemic. That, I think, is what the people